All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for, excuse me, for the month of Tammuz, Rabbi Naftali Tilson of Yisrael, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his parents, Rabbi Yona ben Avraham, Leah, and Rivka bas Yaakov. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the merit of Hashem, and Neshama Shav and Aliyah, and of course, in the merit of the entire Daf Chevra, that we should be zocheh merit Hashem to complete Shas together bekarov. Our week of learning sponsors Binyomin Fleischman in memory of his father Rabbi Shmuel Yudel ben Binyomin Yaakov, Yehuda Jennie Goodhart, Leah Nishmas Yishaya Zalman ben Laser, and Leah Sol in honor of Avraham and Silber and Zeesy Frankel's upcoming marriage. Beautiful. All of the neshama should have an aliyah. The families ein nechama. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today: Shani Topper and family, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shani's grandparents, Yitzchak ben Mordechai and Sarah bas Yoshua. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the neshama will have an aliyah and the families ein nechama. So many beautiful sponsorships. And I will say for a whole gamut of life cycle events. And Meretz Hashem, all of the neshama should have an aliyah. All of the families should have a nechama. And in Meretz Hashem, all of our chasen and kalas should be zocheh Meretz Hashem to build Binyomin ade ad. All right, I will say let's begin. A lot to do today. Really an incredible Gemara today. Some fascinating halacha, fascinating concepts. So I will say today's daf is Lamed Vav 35. We are picking up on Lamed Hem and Beis 35. Sorry, today's daf is 36. We're picking up on Lamed Hem and Beis 35b, 10 lines up from the bottom. Samara asked the following shaila. So we'll say this is a general question. This actually goes back to our Nedarim days as well. When going to a chacham for revocation of the neder, does a person have to articulate, right? Does a person have to go ahead and tell the chacham exactly what the neder is or not? So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman Amar Eino Tzarech. Rav Nachman says, no, it's unnecessary. Rav Papa Amar Tzarech. Rav Papa says, no, you have to. So let's analyze each position. Rav Nachman Amar Eino Tzarech. Rav Nachman says you don't have to. Di Amrit Tzarech. For if you say that you have to be mefaret, explicitly articulate the neder, Zimnin the guy is leila digure. And I will say sometimes a person is going to go ahead and literally truncate their speech. In other words, you could have a situation where a person is not going to fully articulate what the neder was. The chacham ma'id shama mefer. And what's the problem? The chacham, I will say, in halacha there's a concept of ein ladayin ladon elamashe in of rose. A judge can only adjudicate based on what his eyes see. Similarly, it's right, ein lachacham lahafer elama sha'oznov shomos. A chacham can only nullify an neder based on what his ears hear. So the ma'ase, again, the concern is if you tell a person they have to go ahead and fully articulate, so the ma'ase, again, all they could judge their revocation on is based on what they hear. Let's say a person chooses to omit certain information, but the chacham is made for the neder. So essentially, again, the neder itself is annulled. But l'ma'ase is only annulled based on partial information. So that, of course, is problematic. Rav Papa says, no. You have to articulate the neder. Why? Because what happens if someone is coming along and trying to revoke something that is really prohibited? And remember again, that's why this is here. If you remember again, let's link this back. What was yesterday's sugya? Yesterday feels like a million years ago. Let's say, well, what was yesterday's sugya? Yesterday's sugya was the Mishnah said that in general an almana is only permitted to collect from the property, from the estate of the yisomim for a ksuva with the shavua. Right? We then went ahead and said we stopped the shavua. Why do we stop the shavua? Why do we stop the shavua? Out of a concern that she's going to lie. She's going to convince herself that she's not lying. She's going to be what we call mora heter, right? Justify her lying under oath. So we replace the shula with a neder. So essentially what happens is if she wants to collect her ksuva, she has to take a neder saying, if I received any prepayment for my ksuva, whatever, bread will be prohibited to me for the rest of my life, for the next 50 years, whatever it is. And that neder allows her to collect. So remember again, what we ended off yesterday's sugya was, well, what happens if now she got remarried? Could she still take that neder? Because after all, again, she now has a husband who could be made for her neder. So the Gemara said, one second, even if she's not married, she could go to the chacham and have the chacham be made for her neder, be made to her neder. So we'll say that's why this is coming up over here now. So now again, based on that entire discussion, so we'll say, so the answer that the Gemara gave, by the way, in terms of taking away the worry that the chacham will annul her neder. Remember, what was the answer the Gemara gave? Neder should be rabim. We ultimately again give her what we call a public neder, right? A neder that she takes in front of 10 people, which ultimately the Gemara suggested cannot be annulled. Cannot be annulled. So I'll say now the Gemara kind of took a step back from that conversation and said, okay, well in general, when going to a chacham for hataras nedarim, so ultimately for hafaras nedarim, for hataras nedarim, ultimately again, do you have to explicitly articulate the neder or not? So that's the machlokes over here. And Rav Papa says, of course you have to articulate the neder, because if you don't tell the chacham what you're coming for, what could happen? Abba say this kind of case, you could have a case of an almana who came to collect her ksuva from the estate of the Yisomim. Right? Remember, we're not making her take a shvur, making her take a neder. She takes the neder. Now what happens? She collects her ksuva. Meanwhile, she's lying. But she figures, no problem, I'm going to go to the chacham, tell the chacham I want to get out of my neder. If she doesn't have to articulate what the neder was, what's going to happen? She's going to say, I'm here to have another neder annulled. Chacham's going to say, okay, because you don't have to articulate what the neder was, and suddenly she's freed from the neder. So the whole mechanism that we try to employ is fundamentally undermined. Okay, so Tanan, let's analyze. Very interesting case. Hanosim noshim ba'avera. We'll say Kohen. There are certain women a Kohen is not permitted to marry. So let's say, for example, a Kohen marries a Gerusha. Kohen marries a divorcee, right? Illegal marriage. I will say, remember again, we paskin, this is back to our Yuvamis days, we paskin against Rabbi Akiva. It hurts to say those words, right? Because you always want to be on the same side as Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva has a very extreme position, one extreme position, where he holds that in Kiddushin Einon Tovsin B'chayvei Lavin. Rabbi Akiva paskins that if you try to affect a marriage that is biblically prohibited, not by a death penalty, but by Allah, by a prohibition, the marriage does not work. We don't paskin that way. So for example, I will say, again, if a marriage is punishable by a death penalty, then the marriage doesn't work. So you can't marry your sister. Right? In other words, even if halachically you do the process, there's no marriage. You can't marry another man's wife. Even if you do the process, there's no marriage. But yet, if a Kohen marries a divorcee, which is again biblically prohibited, the marriage is effective. In other words, they are married. It's prohibited every moment they stay in that marriage as a prohibition, but ultimately, again, the marriage works. That's the case over here. Hanosei nashim ba'avera. Let's say a Kohen marries a divorcee, which is obviously prohibited. So what happens? Pasal ad sheyidar hana. Ultimately, again, he is going to be pasal. Now, what does it mean he's going to be pasal? He can't do avoda. He can't work in the Beis Hamikdash until he makes a neder not to get benefit from it. Now, both say, when a husband makes a neder not to get benefit from his wife, what is he effectively doing? Well, it's the precursor to divorce, right? Because Lamais, again, if there could be no, if he can't benefit from her in any way, then there's no marriage. Then they can't live together. I don't just mean intimately. I just mean there's no way to interact. So just listen to how fascinating this case is. So we'll call him Aaron. Aaron HaKohen married Rachel, the divorcee. So now what happens? So now Aaron can't do avodah. He can't show up for work in the Beis Hamikdash. But when can he? So if he takes a neder, actually Yidar Hana, until he goes there and takes a neder, not to get benefit from her. Fine. And ultimately that's the precursor for divorce. V'tani Allah, listen to this. No der va'oved, yoret umagarish. This is actually wild, I will say. Right after he takes the neder, he is allowed to resume doing avoda. Isn't that fascinating? Right after he takes the neder. They will say, right after he takes the neder, is he married or divorced? He's married or divorced? He's married. So what's fascinating about this is you can have a case of a Kohen who is illegally married, yet permitted to do avoda. They're permitted to do avoda. So Lashon over here is, no der va'oved. He can go and take the neder, show up to the Beis Hamikdash, go to work, do the avoda, yored, when he comes back from the Beis Hamikdash, ultimately again, umegarish, and then he divorces his wife. Right? And Rashi says over here, Va'oved avoda va'ava pisha dain lo girsha. But it's fascinating, no? So he could do the avoda even though he has not yet divorced her. Says the Gemara, V'amrit inu tzarech lefaritis haneder, lechosh dilma azal gabe chacham v'sharle. So we'll say, if you would hold that one is not obligated to go ahead and fully articulate the neder, we would have to be concerned that what could Aaron do in this case? Aaron can make the neder, show up for work in the Beis HaMikdash, do the work, right? And then what? On his way home from the Beis HaMikdash, stop by the Chacham, get his neder annulled. And why? How could he get it annulled? How could he get it annulled? Because if you don't have to tell the Chacham what you're coming for, the Chacham is just going to annul it. And then Aaron the Kohen is going to get out of the neder. So I'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here, the Gemara says that it must be that when you go to a Chacham to have your neder annulled, you have to be mefaret. You have to explicitly articulate the neder. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily, top of Lamed Vav, Dimadrina le Barabim. We'll say it's possible that in this case of the Kohen, we administer a neder in public. Now, we'll say, and I remember again, we referenced this yesterday already. There are different types of neder. Generally, when I take a neder, I'm taking a private neder. There's a concept of a neder berabim, which literally means a neder that is undertaken in front of 10 people. That neder has greater teeth, has greater strength. So the Gemara says, well, Hani Chalaman da Amar, neder shuda berabim ein lo hafara. That's fine if you hold that a public neder cannot be annulled. Ella leman da Amar yesh lo hafara, ma'ikal le'mema. But if you hold that a public neder can be annulled, we'll say, then the truth is, if a public, then you're really back at the square one, you're back at the same issue. To which the Gemara says, Dimadrina le al das rabim. Oh, okay, I will say. So now watch this. We administer the neder al das. We'll say al das rabim means with the intent of the public, with the intent that I'm looking at Rashi, al das rabim, kach yomru lo. This is what we say to the Kohen. Hare anu madirin oscha al datenu. We are administering this neder to you on our das. What does it mean on our das? To us, here's what's interesting. In general, when a person makes a neder, right, who defines the parameters of the neder? Who defines the parameters? The vower. Now, the truth is, it's true and not true. But also, if you remember again, one of the guiding lights we had in Mesachas Nedarim, it was a good days in Mesachas Nedarim. Right, one of the things that we said was by Nedarim holchin achar lashon b'nei adam. Remember that phrase? That by Nedarim we go kind of by the way people speak, not necessarily by the way you meant it, but by the way people generally speak. So on one hand, there are certain elements of Nedarim that are objective, but the truth is most of the elements of Nedarim are subjective. Right? If I'm the vower, I am the one determining the parameters of my neder. What's interesting to note is as follows. So a neder shehudar al das rabim means a neder essentially whose parameters are determined not by the vower, but by Chazal. Now I will say, so what's the power of making a neder shudar al das rabim? The power is that whereas when you undertake a neder as a private individual, as a private citizen, then neder can be what? Can be revoked. When you take a neder al das rabim, the rabbim decides whether or not that neder can be revoked. And in this case over here, the rabbim would say the neder cannot be revoked. So I will say, so this is really quite fascinating. To which the Gemara says, Damar Meimar, Hilchasa, Afilu Mandar Neder Shuda Birabim Yesh Lafara. Even according to the opinion who holds that a neder undertaken in public can be annulled, Al Das Rabim Ein Lo Hafara. Ultimately, I will say a neder undertaken with the intent, whose framework is determined by the rabbim, cannot be annulled. So I will say. So let me just point out to you over here, just conceptually, we have 3 different levels of nedarim, right? In level number 1, we'll call it just the stam neder. That's a neder you're undertaking. Now I will say halacha l'maisa, when you undertake a neder, the halacha is, can you get it annulled? Absolutely. Right? By a chacham, or for a woman by her husband. But if you go to a chacham, we pass in tzarech lefarit. You have to articulate what the neder was before the chacham goes ahead and annuls it. That's level 1. Level 2 is neder shehudar berabim, a public neder. What's the definition of public neder? That is a neder undertaken in public. What's the definition of public? 10 people. What's the power of that neder? Well, that's a machlokes. Some say that can be annulled, some say that cannot be annulled. Then there's the highest level, what I call highest, I mean strongest neder. That is a neder shehudar al das rabim. A neder made with the intent of the public, of Chazal. Now I will say what that means essentially is the parameters of that neder are not defined by the vower. The parameters of that neder are defined by Chazal. I will say, what's the power of a neder shehudar al das rabim? No hafara, cannot be revoked. So I will say, let's bring this full circle. So therefore, again, in the case, ultimately, again, of Aaron HaKohen, who married Rachel the divorcee, illegal marriage. Because it's an illegal marriage, he can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash. But he wants to go back to work. So what do we do? We say, Aaron, no problem. What do you need to do? Take a neder al das rabim. Al das rabim. Once Aaron takes that, and they'll say, incredible, once Aaron takes that, what are we allowed to do? Go to work in the Beis HaMikdash. But he's still married. Fascinating, right? He's still married. But because he's taking this neder, that by definition will result automatically in divorce, because there is no revocation for this neder. Therefore, by definition, we allow him to go to work in the Beis HaMikdash, and on your way home, take care of that get. Right? Go to the avoda, on your way home, take care of that get. Well, so I'll just mention something very interesting to me, that this Gemara of, right, the lashon of noder va'oved yored umagaresh. Right, he makes the neder, right, Aaron the Kohen makes the neder that he's going to divorce his wife. He goes to do the avoda, he comes down and he gets the divorce. I was thinking about this, so I don't understand, why not just tell him, get the divorce, and then he'll come back to the Beis HaMikdash? As well say, it's interesting to see that we're allowing him to go ahead and serve in the Beis HaMikdash when technically he is still a party to an illegal marriage. Why not say get divorced and then come to work? So we'll say perhaps Chazal also trying to teach us an incredible metaphor. We'll say, one of the hardest things in life is to recognize that we all live with inconsistencies. Right? We all live with inconsistencies. Sometimes one of the things that drives us craziest is when we see inconsistency in other people. Right? It's difficult sometimes to accept. I would say, and then you're like, whoa, 1 second. I am a truly inconsistent person. Right? How so? I do hopefully many mitzvahs, but I also do many averos. So we think to ourselves, well, that doesn't shtim, right? Either you're a tzaddik or you're a rasha. But the truth is, I will say, life is all about embracing the inconsistency of the human condition and recognizing that in any given moment, for each and every one of us, there are things that I'm doing great, and there are probably things that I'm doing terribly, right? There are things that are going really well, and there are things that are just in such a profound state of disrepair, and they've been that way for so long. I will say, to me, that's the metaphor in this case. You have a Kohen, listen to this case. You have a Kohen who's showing up to the Beis HaMikdash to serve in the holiest place in the world, before the Ribono Shel Olam, and he's gotten a legal marriage. So I'll tell you something crazy. That guy, he's my role model. Why I see my role model? Because what he shows me is that I could be Lifnei Hashem even with all of my baggage. That I could find my way to be in close proximity to the Ribono Shel Olam, even though I am schlepping along some significant isurim. Even though I am in an active state of disrepair, that does not preclude me from coming into the mikdash. It does not preclude me from establishing relationships. Too often, we're purists, right? And we think that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires perfection. Or relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires somehow, remediation of all of my problems. Or I have to address all of my problems. And then I say to myself, well, I can't address all of my problems. I can't deal with this stuff right now. So therefore we say, okay, well, if I can't deal with this stuff, I'm in a state of disrepair. Effectively, I'm married to the divorcee, right? I'm like that going. Then, okay, I'll have to settle for spiritual mediocrity. And it's not true. It's not true. Even with your baggage, you can establish excellence. Even with your isurim, you can come into the mikdash. Even with all of my personalistic disrepair, there is an opportunity for me to forge a beautiful and incredible relationship. I have to deal with my stuff. I can't leave the baggage just sitting there. I have to deal with it. But Lamaisa, I don't have to wait to have a beautiful closeness until I deal with it. I could be in the mikdash. I could be close. I could be connected, even with all of the things that are broken. Such an incredible Gemara. So let's go back there. So the Gemara says, The Gemara is very interesting. When do we say that a neder shehudar al das rabbim doesn't have afara, can't be annulled? That's only about say for what we'll call divrei rishus, for what we'll call non-essential items. Aval dvar mitzvah yesh la afara. But this is actually very interesting. This is a crazy case. For a dvar mitzvah, right, for a mitzvah purpose, you can annul even a neder shehudar al das rabbim. The Gemara gives you an example. I will say this is actually pretty wild. Kiyahu mikri dedar dikir. I will say there was once a Rebbe. Da'adrei Rav'acha al das rabbim. Rav'acha administered to him a neder al das rabbim. Right? That's what? That he is not allowed to teach anymore. Why not? So because he hit kids. So because he hit kids, right? Right? Some of us have stories like this, right? Right? So say because except they continue to teach. Right? So the Maisa again. He made a neder that he can't go ahead and teach kids. Now listen to this. V'ahajay Ravina then had to reinstate him as a Rebbe. Delo ishtachach dedayik kavasei. Ultimately, again, because there was no one who could teach like him. And I will say, I don't know what conclusions one should glean from this story. Rashi actually says, Rashi says, Chovtan yoser midai. He hit too much. Okay, so we'll say, obviously, again, look, in general, when it comes to punishment of children, so many things have changed over the years. And certainly, again, in the realm of teaching, what was acceptable for a teacher, Bismana Gemara, is obviously not acceptable in today's day and age. So just use this story, not as much for its, I'll call it, Lemaisa impact, as much as for its illustrative impact. Namely, even a neder shehudar al das rabbim, which is the strongest neder that could be made, which generally does not have revocation for the purpose of a mitzvah. And in this case, Rabbi, you see over here, mitzvah doesn't even have to mean one of the Tariag mitzvahs. Here, this was a Rebbe who was facilitating Talmud Torah. Of course, learning is a mitzvah, but Lamaisa, he was a vehicle of education, so they were able to revoke the neder ultimately because they felt he provided an indispensable mitzvah service. Incredible. Let's go back there. So let's go back to the Mishnah. It's really incredible sugya. So we'll say, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah also said that Eidim, witnesses, sign on the get for the benefit of society. So the Gemara says, all for the benefit of society, Daraisahu. But we'll say to Daraisa that witnesses have to sign on a document. Tichsiv, v'kasov, v'sefer, v'chasom. But we'll say the pasuk says, and I will say, just to be clear, this is a pasuk in Yirmiyah, in Navi. So we've actually seen this pasuk before. So just a bit of context. This was right before Klal Yisrael was sent out. Right before the Beis HaMikdash was being destroyed, Klal Yisrael was going to go out into diaspora. Remember again, so we saw this actually just a little while ago. In Yirmiyah, Navi tells the Jews, before you leave, make sure that your real estate documents are in order. Right? Why? Because we're going to come back. And when we come back, there may be other people living in our land. And we have to be able to furnish the proper paperwork to go ahead and show that we are the true owners. So the Lashon over here is Kasav Basefer, record your property ownership in documents, V'chasom, and make sure the documents are signed. So you see here, I will say that's what? So the Gemara calls this a Doraisa. But of course, it's not literally a Doraisa because this is a pasuk in Navi. But the point that the Gemara is making over here is it's not a Tikkun Olam thing. We find it in Tanakh. Amarabba lo tzricha l'Rabbi Elazar. So very simple. Rabbi says, you're right. Who are we talking about? Or who, in accordance with who? Rabbi Elazar. So what does Rabbi Elazar hold? The Amar Eidei Mesira Karsi. Rabbi Elazar will say that for the get, it is the witnesses who witness the giving over of the get who ultimately create the effectiveness of the documents. Well, according to Rabbi Elazar, who holds Eidei Mesira Karsi, technically you do not need Eidei Chasima. Right? Remember again, technically you don't need witnesses on the get. But yet the Mishnah says, even according to Rabbi Elazar, who holds Eidei Mesira Karsi, you should have witnesses who sign on the get. Takin Rabbanan Eidei Chasima. Chazal instituted that you should have witnesses sign. Why? Mipnei Tikuna Olam, for the benefit of society. What's the benefit of society? The Zimnin, the Maisi Sahadi, sometimes, right? The Zimnin, the Maisi Sahadi, sometimes the witnesses will die. As the Rabbi say, what happens if Reuven gives Rachel a get, right? And then he gives it to her in front of Eidei Mesira, and the Eidei Mesira die. And they will say, now, what's the problem you have now? What do you have left? A document, right? But there's no signatures on the document, and there are no witnesses to corroborate that this document was given. So we'll say, so what's there to stop Reuven from saying, I never gave the document to Rachel, Actually, I had it written, then I changed my mind. Rachel stole it from my desk. And he could claim they were never divorced. So what's there? In other words, what's there to upend that claim? Normally, Eidei Mesira would say, no, we were there. We saw you give it over. But now if Eidei Mesira are dead, so this way again, even Rabbi Lazar would say, have the get signed. This way again, even if Eidei Mesira die, Lamaisa, there's a way to validate, to get through the signatures of witnesses that are there. Inami, Zinin Razik Dimidinasam, or even if they're not dead, just sometimes the Eidei Mesira are not available to corroborate the fact that the get was given. That's Rabbah. Rav Yosef Amra, Afilu Tem Rabbi Meir. Even Rabbi Meir. Remember, Rabbi Meir holds Eidei Chasim Akarsi, she who Eidim Mefarshin Shmosein Begittin Tikon Abo said, this is fascinating. It could very well be, Rabbi say, that the Mishnah is even reflecting the view of Rabbi Meir. 1 second, Rabbi Meir already holds Eidei Chasim Akarsi. Watch this, Rabbi say. It could be that in the signatures of witnesses there was an evolution of the halacha. What does this mean? Give the sign. Rabbi say, get ready for this. This is wild. Barishona Haya Kosev Ani Ploni Chasamti Eid. Rabbi say, in the beginning, when a witness would sign a document, how would he sign it? Ani Ploni. Rabbi say, literally again, right? Me, Ruvain, all right, Chasamti Eid, right? I signed this as a witness. Not Reuven ben Yaakov, not Reuven is. In fact, it seems to me, according to some of the opinions, he would even just write Ploni. Now, I will say, you'll ask yourself, what is the point of signing a document that just says your first name, not your father's name? We're just signing as Ploni. Because I will say, how were witnesses corroborated? Through their handwriting. So I will say, in the beginning, the way that signatures on a document worked was not because of the names that were written, but rather, again, through the signatures, through validation of the signatures. And I will say, if you're validating signatures, so the actual name on it that's written to a certain degree is somewhat irrelevant. In Ksav Yodo Yotze Mimakom Acher Kosher Ve'im Lav Pasal. So I will say, now if you think about it, you think to yourself, why would you do that? So I will say, it's actually interesting because it's a much stronger form of kiyum shtaros, of document validation, because now the only way to validate the document is to find a matching handwriting sample somewhere else, which the pashtus probably meant that you had a much smaller pool of witnesses who were signing on documents. That must be the result of this. So I will say, so therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says that mipnei tikkun ha'olam, what do they institute? Witnesses? Write your full name on the document. I will say that was the tikkun ha'olam. In the beginning, witnesses would just say, "Ani Ploni, me Ruvain, I signed as an aid," or just Ploni wrote as an aid, and you'd have to corroborate the document through matching signatures. The tikkun ha'olam, the benefit of society takana was witnesses write out your full name. I, Ruvain, the son of Yaakov, went and has signed this document as an aid. Incredible. Rabbi Gamliel said they made a significant takana, Gittin, that witnesses should spell out their entire name in Gittin. Ultimately, again, because of the benefit of society. And the benefit of society, of course, is that lamaisa, it'll be much easier to validate documents. Right? In other words, if you know, can you imagine if all you're doing is matching handwriting samples? B'pashtos, that's a much longer process. I mean, it could be shorter if it ends up just being a much smaller witness pool, right? But Lamai says it seems to be like a longer process. Once you have the witnesses go ahead and write out their names, hopefully that makes the entire validation process much easier. Simar says, is that to say b'simna lo? Shabbos says, so that means that contemporarily now, a witness has to actually sign his name. What about signing a symbol? And I was going to say, so let's say me, I have a symbol. My symbol is Magen David, right? So is that not enough? So the Gemara says, Vaha Rav Tzayer Kura. Yet I will say, interesting enough, the way Rav signed documents, I will say, was the image of a fish. That was Rav's image. When you saw a fish on a document, that was Rav. Rabbi Chanina Tzayer Charusa. Rabbi Chanina ultimately, again, his symbol was a palm tree. Rav Chisda Samech. Rav Chisda just used to sign with a big Samech. Rav Hoshia Ayin. Rav Hoshia used to sign with a big Ayin. Rabbi Rav Huna Tzayer Makusa. And Rabbi Rav Huna used to sign with the image of a sail. of a sale. So I will say, so you see from here, these are all great people who signed with images, didn't sign with their names, yet again it appears that it worked. Shani Rabbanan de Bikian Simanaihu. I will say it was different. Everyone knew their siman. So I will say it's different. In other words, so everyone knew whenever you saw a fish signed on a document, that was Rav. Right? That was right. In other words, it was ultimately, again, it was known. So I will say, the Gemara says something amazing. The Gemara says, Meikara b'mayef kinu. So I will say, here's what's interesting. But the interesting thing in life is, before things become known, they are unknown, right? So I'll say, so I understand that Lamaisa, these Simonim became associated with these great men. But how did it work in the beginning? In other words, there must have been the first time that Rav signed a fish. Can you imagine the first chasana, right? Rav, right, he comes up, he puts a fish on the line, right? Can you imagine the Sadiq Kiddushin? What's the matter with you, right? Sign your name, right? Can you imagine the reaction to that? So I'll say, so me'ikara, right? So the first, how did it start? How did it start in the beginning? So this is very interesting. Bediski. You're right, it didn't start on documents, I will say. Instead, I will say, Diski is Rashi says, Shtari Shilas Utshuvos Ushlomos. So I will say, how did it start with? Responsa. So this is fascinating. In other words, Rav was a posek. He says a posek, what would he get? He'd get Shilas, right? He'd get questions. So on his responsa, when he would sign off in his responsa, he would sign the fish, right? So again, the first guy who probably got that back was like, I'm not asking Rav any more questions, right? This is just too weird, right? But Lamaisa, when the question, so I'll say, so that's how it got established. So interesting enough, in other words, what the Gemara essentially says is, could you sign with a defining siman that is yours and yours alone? Sure. But the way that works to become associated as your signature probably does not work on signing on documents. Rather, again, it works through establishing that signature through other means. Then once it's established as yours, then ultimately it can be used on documents as well. Pretty interesting. Good, let's go back there. So I was saying now we're getting to an incredibly fascinating sugya, the sugya of Pruzbal. Very exciting. So Pruzbal, Hillel Hiskin Pruzbal. Hillel instituted the Pruzbal. Not a sporting event. Well, say, so now listen to this. So, all right. So listen to this. So we learned, Pruzbal eno meshamet. So we'll say, now listen to this. What is a Pruzbal? Now we're going to get into a Pruzbal, but we'll say the idea of here is when you write a Pruzbal, ultimately, again, a Pruzbal prevents your loans from being canceled. Remember, again, Shemitah, we're often used to Shemitah just being a sabbatical year for land, can't work for land. In addition to that, Shemitah also cancels all outstanding debts, right? So I lend $10,000 to Ruvain. Shemitah comes. Shemitah wipes out that debt. Ruvain is not obligated to go ahead and pay me back, and I am not allowed to collect that debt from Ruvain. So watch this. This is one of the things that Hillel the elder instituted. I will say now, what motivated Hillel to establish Pruzbal? He saw, we'll say, that what was happening. As Shemitah was approaching, people were reluctant to lend money to each other. Which makes sense. So I'll say again, people are people. Remember, as I mentioned before, Jewish lending in general is not a lucrative endeavor because of the prohibitions on interest. So already as it is when you're quote unquote lending money, you are to a certain degree taking a loss. So now Shemitah comes and I totally lose the debt. People were hesitant. Hillel says, I will say, if there's one thing that we need in the Jewish community, I will say, is there has to be a free flow of lending, of money being lent. Right? I'll say this is essential. So I'll say not just for tzedakah, it's necessary for commerce. Right? We do need to have within the Jewish community, there has to be an ongoing willingness to lend each other money, both for charitable purposes, but more importantly, I will say again for economical purposes, right? For commerce purposes. So the problem Hillel saw was Shemitah was coming, and there was a total dramatic drop in lending. Now, both say, you can imagine that has ripple effects on greater society. So Hillel felt the need to step in, right? He goes and he's va'avru al masha kasabatora hishamalacha penye davra im bevalcha bilial lomar karva shnasa sheva shnasa shmita. Now, both say, now the Torah itself warns us against this. right? The Torah itself says, right, don't let some alien concept enter into your heart saying the Shemitah year is coming, don't lend money. Okay, Torah tells us not to do a lot of things, but we still do it. And I want to say, this is human nature. This is human nature to say, again, I'm willing to be the guy who lends without interest. I don't know if I'm willing to be the guy who lends and never gets his money back. I'll say that's a much harder ask. So Hillel saw people were not lending. So what did he do? Amad v'hiskin pruzbol. He went ahead and he got up and he instituted pruzbol. Now I will say, before we get into pruzbol, I just want to show you something amazing. What is the true definition of leadership? What is the true definition of leadership? True definition of leadership is seeing a problem and being willing to get up and roll up your sleeves and do something about it. See, I will say, so often in life in general, we go ahead and we confront issues, right? We see a problem, we see something that's broken. And I will say, you know what ends up happening? 9 out of 10 times, when people see something that's broken, what do? What do? They lament it. So sad or so terrible, and then move on. Right? A leader, and I will say, when we talk about leadership doesn't have to be someone who occupies an actual position of leadership. Leadership is a midah. Leadership is a character trait. And what a leader says is, when I see something that's broken, I'm going to do my best to try to fix it. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But one thing is clear, which is I'm not just going to turn the other way and continue on. If there's something that is a problem, something that is broken, and I'm seeing it, then I'm going to try to do my part and fix it. That's what a leader does. So Hillel sees a problem and he comes up with an incredible mechanism. So I'll say, what's the mechanism? Here it is. Amar v'iskin prozbol. V'zeu gufa shel prozbol. I'll say, this is the prozbol. Mosrani lachem ploni uploni dayanin. I hereby give over to you. And I both say, who's writing the prozbol? The lender. Right? What is the lender doing? The lender is effectively giving over his debt to Beis Din. I'm giving my debt to Beis Din. Therefore, any debt that I have by so and so, right? The name of sometimes there are different versions. Sometimes the name of the borrower is mentioned, sometimes it's not mentioned. But we'll go with any debt that I have by Ploni, so and so, right? The name of the borrower is mentioned. She'eretz kozman she'eretz, she'gvena kozman she'eretz. I can collect whenever I want. V'adayanim chos milamato ha'edim. The witnesses or the judges go ahead and sign on the bottom. Now, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Mosrani lachem. Es shtarosai, I hereby give you over my loan documents. Sha'atem tiya nogzim, va'ani lo egos. So ultimately, again, you collect it, I'm not collecting it. Ulakaman moki dieshka. See, the idea over here is, we'll get into the mechanics in just a little bit, right? But lamaisa, the idea of pruzbal, we'll say, what debt does Shemitah cancel? Shemitah only cancels privately held debt. That's the way it works. Shemitah does not cancel Beis Nadat. So I'll give you the perfect proof to this. If I owe money to the Beis HaMikdash or to the shul, right? I owe money to an institution. Shemitah, right, does not cancel that. Shemitah only cancels privately held debt. So Hillel comes up with this idea where essentially pruzbol is, well, we'll see by the way what the term itself means. I take my privately held debt and I give it to Beis Din. So Beis Din, my debt is now conveyed over to you. Once my debt is conveyed over to you, Shemitah no longer cancels it, and therefore there is the ability to go ahead and collect it whenever you want. Whenever you want. Incredible. That has such a simple mechanism, but we'll have to see the mechanics of it. So the Gemara says, one second. So let me get this straight. So Midaraisa, Shemitah wipes out this debt. And now Hillel is going to institute that ultimately is going to be collectible. Right? So I'll say, I understand, how could Hillel legislate against the Torah? The Torah says that Shemitah wipes out the debt, and Hillel's going to say it doesn't? What does that mean? Abaye b'shiyas b'zman hazeh. So I'll say, watch this. So Abaye says, remember, this is talking about contemporary Shemitah. So I will say, what's the idea over here of contemporary Shemitah? The sign of Rabbi Omer, v'zeh dvar Shemitah. So the pasuk says, this is the matter of Shemitah. Shamot. Go ahead, right? Literally, again, observe Shemitah. B'shtei Shemitah zakasam medaber. Torah is speaking about two different Shemitahs. So achos Shemitah's karka. One is talking about Shemitah of the land. The achos Shemitah's ksofim. So I will say Shemitah's karka means you can't work the land. the Shemitah's Ksafim, which is Shemitah wipes out debt. So the Gemara said, Bizman she'ata mishamet karka, when Shemitah's karka applies, ata mishamet Ksafim. So Shemitah's Ksafim applies. Bizman she'ata mishamet karka, when Shemitah doesn't apply to the land, i'ata mishamet Ksafim, then Shemitah's Ksafim doesn't apply as well. So Rabbi say, so now what's happening over here? The Gemara is suggesting that what we call Shemitah's karka, Shemitah of the land, doesn't apply biblically. And Rabbi say, why would Shemitah not apply biblically? So both Rashi and Tosfos highlight this idea, Rabbi say. In order for Shemitah to go ahead and apply biblically, what has to happen? Yovel has to be in effect. Right? Rabbi say, Yovel, the 50th year, right, the Jubilee year, Yovel has to be in effect. Yovel is only in effect when Rov Yoshveh Aleha. There's a machlokes, Kol Yoshveh Aleha, Rov Yoshveh Aleha. But let's go with the idea that a majority of Klal Yisrael has to be residing in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Majority. So when a majority of Eretz Yisrael lives in Eretz Yisrael, then Yovel is in effect. When Yovel is in effect, then Shemitah is in effect Doraisa. So therefore, what the Gemara is suggesting is like this: in the times of Hillel, the majority of Klal Yisrael was not living in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, Shemitah was being observed, but only observed rabbinically. Because Shemitah was being observed rabbinically, therefore Hillel had the ability to legislate that Shemitah should not wipe out debt. So let's just finish this up. So the Gemara says like this: Shemitah only applies midaraisa when Yovel applies. Yovel only applies when the majority of Klal Yisrael lives in Eretz Yisrael. And remember again, Shemitah's karka, only when there's Shemitah's karka is there Shemitah's ksafim. If there's no da'oraisa Shemitah's karka, then there is no da'oraisa Shemitah's ksafim. Amud beis, v'takinu rabbanan detishamet zech l'shvius. I will say, so therefore again, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Really, even though now there's no biblical Shemitah, but Chazal went ahead and instituted that Shemitah should apply. Right? That we should not forget the concept of Shemitah. So therefore Shemitah's karka applies, Shemitah's ksafim applies, and therefore again, midrabanan, Shemitah wipes out all debts. Now we'll say, Ra Hillel, Lamed Vavam is 36b, Ra Hillel, Sheninu Ame Lahavo Zez. So we'll say, so now the story makes sense. Hillel saw, okay, it's very nice that we're observing rabbinic Shemitah, right? And therefore debt is being erased. So what happened? Hillel saw that as a result of this, people were stopping to lend money to each other. Amad v'hiskin prusbal. Ultimately, again, he went ahead and he instituted prusbal. So now, both say now it's a much easier sell. Why is it a much easier sell? Because the institution of prusbal, both say, is uprooting what? Is uprooting rabbinic Shemitah's ksafim. Now, or I should say, uprooting not biblical Shemitah's ksafim. Now, both say, I just want to point out this discussion of Shemitah being linked to Yovel is Shemitah Bizman Hazeh, D'oraisa or D'Rabbanon, is a big discussion. But I will say this has many ramifications, even contemporarily, in terms of Heter Mechira, not Heter Mechira. So again, we're obviously not doing this Sugya complete justice. And again, I would urge you to take a look at Tosfos, Bizman Shata Mishamet, very interesting Tosfos there. Rashi, Shvius, Bizman Hazeh, but we're just going to go by it now. So also, the Gemara says as follows. Umi ikamidi, dimidaaraisa lo misham teshvius. So let me get this straight, Rabbi Silber. So now, basically what you're saying is like this. Contemporarily, right, when I say contemporarily, we talk about the times of Hillel. Contemporarily, in the times of Hillel, Shemitah did not apply. Right? Shemitah did not apply midaraisa. The rabbis then instituted that Shemitah's ksafim should apply. So I just want to tell you what that means. What that means is that midaraisa, right? Let's play this out. Right? You're living in the times of Hillel. Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Okay? Now the Shemitah year comes. Midaraisa, what's the halacha? That is collectible. There's no Shemitah. The Rabbanan came along and say, no, the debt is wiped out. So Gemara says, 1 second. Midaraisa lo mishamta. So midaraisa, Shemitah would not wipe out the debt. Right? And Chazal went ahead and said that it should wipe it out. I will say essentially, what are Chazal doing? Chazal are facilitating an act of theft. What's the act of theft? They're allowing the borrower not to repay the lender. Even though midaraisa, the borrower is absolutely obligated to pay back the lender. Why? Because midaraisa Shemitah did not wipe out the debt. So midaraisa, the borrower has to repay the lender, but Chazal are coming along and saying, it's okay, you don't have to. How can you do that? So we're just going to say, Abaye says, no, because Chazal actually have the ability, I will say in general, this is actually fascinating, Chazal have the ability to go ahead and override biblical law, b'shev v'altasa, in a passive way, not an active. I will say Rashi points out, what's the paradigmatic example of this? Paradigmatic example of this, shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, Rashi brings down, right? If Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, I will say, what's the halacha? We don't blow shofar. But 1 second. Midarais, you have to blow shofar. Remember again, that's still Gzir D'Rabba. Chazal work is when you may come to carry the shofar. But how could Chazal legislate that you don't perform a mitzvah d'oraisa? Because Chazal have the ability to be oker davar min haTorah b'shei v'altasa. They have the ability, the license, to uproot a biblical mandate passively. Not actively, but passively. Rava Amar Rav, and therefore I will say, and therefore same thing over here. Chazal have the ability to say to the borrower, don't pay back. It's passive. Rava Amar Rav says, Hefker, Bezin, Hefker. No, it's not a big deal, because Bezin has control over money. So because Bezin has control over money, they have the ability to say that even though Mid'araisa, on a biblical level, Shemitah's Ksafim is not in effect, and therefore you borrower shouldn't really have to pay back. We have control over money, and we choose to say that the money should remain with the borrower. He doesn't have to repay the lender. Fine. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak, Minay shehefker bezin hefker. From where do we know about say? From where do we know this concept? We've quoted it so many times. From where do we know hefker bezin hefker? Which I will say literally means bezin can make hefker whatever they want, but what it means is bezin has control over the monetary issues of Klal Yisrael. Where do we see that from? So listen to this. The Gemara says, Shneimar b'cholasha lo yavo b'shloshes yomim. Ke'atzas hasarim v'azakinim yachran kol yiruchusho v'hu yivda mikal hagola. So the Gemara goes to the pasuk from Ezra. I will say, remember again, this is where Ezra was trying to convince everyone to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And remember, who wasn't coming? Who was not showing up? Shevet Levi. Now, when I say Shevet Levi, Levian. Kohanim were showing up. We just mentioned this a couple of days ago. So Ezra said, literally, whoever does not show up within 3 days, Ke'atzas hasarim v'azakinim, in accordance with the council of the officers and the elders, all of his property becomes hefker. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar, so it says, from here you see that Ezra was able to declare that if you don't show up, your property is hefker. Where do you get that power from? That's hefker, bezin hefker. So Rabbi Elazar, Amar Mehacha, Ela hanachlos asher nachalu Elazar akoin v'Yoshua benun, b'roshe avos. These are the portions that were portioned out by Elazar akoin and Yoshua benun, Roshe ha'avos. What does that phrase mean? Roshe ha'avos. Lomar lecha, ma'avos manchilin esmerein. I will say, just like a father bequeaths property to his son, right? A father conveys ownership of things to his son. Komashir, to anything he wants, right? There was during his life, a father could give to his son whatever he wants to. Af roshim manchilin esam komashir to. So Shabbos said the heads of Klal Yisrael, i.e. Beis Din, have the ability to give to Klal Yisrael whatever they choose as well. So now if you bring this all together, here's what we have. Hillel saw that the Shemitah year was coming, and as the Shemitah year approached, what happened? What happened? A significant decrease in lending of money out of concern of not getting repaid. Hillel felt, okay, I have a little bit of room to navigate here. Why? Why did Hillel have a little bit of room to navigate? Why? Because Shemitah was only D'Rabbanan. Why was Shemitah D'Rabbanan? Because Yovel wasn't in effect. Why wasn't Yovel in effect? Because the majority of Klal Yisrael was not living in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, again, Hillel says, all we have is Rabbinic Shemitah. Because even though, again, Midaraisa Shemitah shouldn't apply, Chazal instituted Shemitah, ultimately, again, Zeichel Shvis. People shouldn't forget the concept of Shemitah. So now it's D'Rabbanan. Hillel thought because it's D'Rabbanan, he has the ability to intervene. So what did he do? He comes up with the mechanism of Prusbal. What does Prusbal say? Again, Shemitah cancels out individually held debt, but does not cancel out Beis held debt. So essentially, or institutionally held debt. So therefore, what did Hillel do? Essentially, he said to the lender, transfer your debts to Beis Din, and the debt remains collectible. But again, Mid'oraisa, if Shemitah, in fact, Mid'oraisa, if ultimately, again, Shemitah is not canceling this debt, so ultimately what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says that Halacha L'maisa, Prusbal works either through the mechanism of Shevi Atarsa, or perhaps more appropriately, Hefker Beis Din Hefker. Incredible. So, Ki hiskin Hillel prosbal l'dari hu tikun or dimul l'dari alma nami tikun. Rabbi said when Hillel instituted prosbal, was that just an enactment for his generation, or was that an enactment for future generations as well? That's the shayla. So the Gemara says, "L'may nafkamina." Who cares? Who cares? In other words, what does it matter? Rabbi said, obviously, so who cares is do we still have it today? But look what he writes. He says, "Levatule." Do we have the ability ultimately again to negate, to be mevatel, to abolish prosbal? So if you just said he did it for his own generation, then yeah. In other words, we have the ability to perpetuate it, but we also have the ability to abolish it. If you say that when Hillel instituted prosbal, he instituted this as an ongoing eternal mechanism, then what? Bless you. So I'll say, remember again, this is a general concept in Dinei Drabanan. Well, say Dinei Drabanan work as follows. Whenever you have a Beis that instituted something, there is a mechanism to repeal or to abolish. But what does it require? It requires a rabbinic body of at least similar number and wisdom in order to repeal it. So that I will say, by the way, that's why we know that we have Dinei Drabanan on the books that were made to remedy certain situations, and those concerns no longer apply. We know that. But the halachos still remain as part of the legal process. Why? Because in order to repeal something, there's a mechanism. You need a rabbinic body of at least the same number and wisdom to repeal it, and we don't have that. Hey, so the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, again, if Hillel did this for eternity, so to speak, you would be able to uproot it, but you would need a rabbinic body of at least equal number and wisdom. To which the Gemara says, "My Tashma Rabbi Shmuel lo kasvina prosba ela bebeidina disura ibeidina dinarda." So listen to this. So Shmuel said you can only write a prosbal in a basin of like surah or a basin of narda. These, which I will say, were major Jewish cities. So if you hold that Hillel instituted prosbal, right, forever, then the truth is prosbal should be able to be written in any beis din. So kitak in Hillel dari alma, b'shar beis din nami lechtevu. Dilma kitak in Hillel dari alma kegon beidina didei ukirav ami ukirav asi da'alimi la'afkui mamona. So we'll say it could very well be, it's not necessarily true. It could very well, so we're going to stop over here with this. Could very well be that Hillel instituted prosbal to be an ongoing mechanism, to be used for all future generations. That being said, he felt that prosbal should be done in a powerful beis din, in a beis din that has the ability to extract money. What's the logic? The logic of Moshe is, since prosbal, at least according to one opinion, works through the mechanism of hefker, beis din, hefker, then you should only do it in a beis din, ultimately again, which has the power to extract money. So in fact, the enactment was forever, but it should be done in the kind of beis din that has the power of monetary extraction. Also, stop over here for today. We're not finished with this. There's still more to do. Ultimately again in the prosbal sugya, and Me'ez Hashem to be continued. We'll say shkoyach. All right, Chevra Zoom, have a great day, everyone.
Amen.